Morning, everyone. Hello, hello. How are you? I hope you're well. I hope you can see us. I hope you can hear us or hear me at least. We're live on YouTube and Facebook this morning, so please do say hello. Let us know where you're watching from. It's lovely already to see so many of you tuning in. I'm just keeping an eye on numbers and the comments to my left. So I do hope that you can join us this morning. If you have a friend or a colleague or a family member that you think would really benefit from this Facebook Live about DLD, please do share this with them because we want as many to know about this as possible. So do say hello. We don't bite, not anymore, just at breakfast. And let us know where you're watching from. It's always quite fascinating because we can get people from watching overseas, which is lovely, spreading the word far and wide. So for those watching who don't know me, I'm Chrissa. I'm the founder of Sunshine Support. I'm a huge ambassador for DLD as I've got a daughter who's very outspoken with DLD. Just to give you a bit of a flavour of DLD before we get into things. DLD stands for Developmental Language Disorder, and it's the most common learning difficulty in neurodivergence. Yet, in a poll a few years ago, we found that 90% of teachers have never heard of DLD, which is just mad. But actually living it, it's not actually a surprise. So we're on a mission to change that. And on Friday is DLD Awareness Day, on Friday the 17th of October. So hopefully you will see a lot of DLD content this week to really help in creating awareness. But also beyond awareness, we need acceptance and we need real sort of input in terms of supporting children and having an understanding of how we help children. I've been sharing a lot this week already, last week and this week, over on my Instagram. If anybody wants the link, by the way, to my Instagram, just comment Chrissa and the team will share a link to my Instagram so you can see some of those videos because my daughter has been doing the videos. So I can see we've got lots of people watching. I'll come to your comments in a second. So please do. Oh, there's an interesting comment already. My ADHD is pricked up like, oh, wow. So keep your comments coming and we'll come to them in a second. So I'm delighted. You will see I'm not on my own. I just wanted to get in there and talk to you a little bit about the facts of DLD because 2 to 3 children in every class of 30 have DLD. But how many are actually being identified? I bet there might be even more when we start to sort of really understand it. But I'm delighted this morning. I'm not on my own, as you can see. I've got 2 very special guests with me today, Hannah and Lauren, who've been undertaking some vital DLD research. Morning, ladies. How are you both?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah, very happy to be here. Hello.
Good, good. So you're in safe hands. So relax your shoulders because I can chat if ever it goes quiet. But no, don't necessarily make any sense. But so let's do some introductions. Hannah, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what your link is with DLD and why you've done this research?
Yeah, I would love to. So yeah, I'm Hannah. I'm a researcher at Birmingham City University, and do lots of research around DLD and more sort of like the lived experience of what it's like to live with DLD. That is my main interest, and I got into it very early actually. I started my undergrad degree in 2012, so that doesn't feel that long ago, but it actually is now, in speech and language sciences, and was just always knew that I wanted to work in children's language difficulties. And back then it was called specific language impairment. We didn't have that term DLD. And then I started, after I did my undergrad in speech and language science, I started my PhD, and I was looking at what terminology, so what actually do speech and language therapists use when they give a diagnosis of a language disorder. And what I found was that quite often, and I was so surprised by this actually, they weren't using formal diagnostic terms. they were saying things like, oh, language difficulties or word finding challenges. I thought that's very interesting. I wasn't expecting that. So I interviewed them, or a sample of them, and I said, why is that? Why is that happening? And there were lots of challenges around sort of unclear criteria or difficulties with confidence to give that kind of new diagnosis of DLD. But the biggest issue was they were worried about what families would think when they heard that word disorder about their very young child. So I thought, well, we really need to hear from some families to find out how they really feel, because I suppose in that moment, that diagnostic moment, that clinician sees a very small fragment of that family and their life. So I thought, well, let's find out what families think and what they actually want, and what they need from that diagnostic interaction, which is what led me to the project of finding out about families' experiences of getting that diagnosis. And that is how I met the wonderful Lauren.
Amazing. What a nice segue there, Lauren.
That was very impressive.
Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself as well, Lauren?
Yeah, so I have a son with DLD, and I had been a teacher, early years teacher, for many years. I'd clocked up over 20 years. Sorry, just kick the computer. And I had worked with a wide range of children. I have all my training every year. I have my training in autism, training in this, training in that. I'm all up to speed. And then my son was born, my second child, and I noticed it was a very different experience to my first child. My first child was really chatty, and he was speaking and using really complicated language from a very young age. I knew a lot of young children, but I didn't know a lot of 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds. So I was very good at 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds upwards. So I knew what to expect with that age range. So 1 and 2 was new territory for me. So I didn't really realize how good my eldest was at speaking. And we'd go and visit family and they'd say, whoa, okay, he's amazing. And I'm like, oh, thank you. I'll take a compliment. I think he's normal, but thank you for saying that. Because now I know that the family experience in the wider family wasn't necessarily chatty young children. So then second child comes along and it's not the same as the first one at all. He's doing typical things. So he's babbling. He's physical. He's up and walking at 10 months, which was not a fan of that. Like, oh, okay, no rush, babe. You can sit down for a bit longer. We don't be childproofing the house this early. But then once he's hitting 2 years old, he was still not talking. There were little talking-like behaviors. So he's verbal. He's making kind of sounds and almost words, but it is a handful. It is the tiniest amount of more kind of babbly words. And I'm then just wanting him to talk. I want to have a chat with him. I want to hear his voice. And I'm a bit conscious that other kids around that we've known of the same age, they're talking and they're starting to say little mini sentences to their mums. So I'm feeling then a little bit anxious about what's happening here. So then we kind of starting to think, oh, is there something else going on here? And sort of fast forward to a chat with a speech therapist who mentions DLD. And I'm then thinking, oh, okay, no, I've not heard of that. I don't know what this is. How do I not know this? So really, as somebody who'd worked with so many kids, worked in education, that realization of, oh, I really don't know anything about speech and language kind of made me then feel very passionate about getting involved and spreading awareness. So my first stop was Raddled, got my Raddled t-shirt, which is a great kind of point for information. And then Raddled suggests, why don't you become a Raddled parent ambassador? So I think, oh, yep. And then you find newsletters about projects. And then I think, oh, yeah, I'd like to get involved in research projects. That sounds really interesting and exciting. And that's how I met Hannah. So she popped out an advert saying, any parents who would like to chat about their experience of diagnosis. And I thought, oh, yes. That sounds really exciting. So it's been really fascinating hearing about other parents' experience of diagnosis, because they're so varied and some are so unsettling, but there's so many commonalities across the experience as well. So it's been really fascinating.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I mean, I stumbled upon you both together because you'd done the first part of the research and you were presenting at the NAPLIC conference, and I was in the audience. And I was like, wow, this was, I mean, all the speakers were fantastic and I was totally engrossed. But you were on towards the end where you would normally then start to sort of, I would start to, with my ADHD and type of age that I am, would start to fall asleep by about that point. But you really piqued my interest because I was thinking, oh, wow, the family's experience. You never hear stuff like this. Like, not, you hear, of course, there's lots of powerful parents out there, you know, I'm surrounded by them all the time. And we can get up on stage and we can really champion that cause. But to see somebody taking it seriously from a research point of view, I was like, wow, this is different. This is really, really different. And so afterwards, I had to reach out to you because I was so engrossed. And I thought it was really interesting how it was incredibly validating, really, really validating to hear that, number one, I'm not on my own. It was like the opposite of being gaslit, you know. But also, I mean, I had a really, really positive experience of my daughter's DLD diagnosis because I got Libby Hill, who I absolutely love and champion. And I mean, in fact, she's doing a webinar next month for us on DLD. So if anybody wants to learn more about DLD and how you get the diagnosis and what to look for, please do comment below with DLD webinar and we'll give you the link. But yeah, she really scooped us up and held our hand through the whole process. So Ridley was 4, and so you could only have a working diagnosis at age 4. Of course, you have to get the diagnosis at age 5. So she gave her the working diagnosis and we instantly put things into place. And she had a fabulous teacher, a fabulous head teacher. And so we all went on a course together. It was one of Libby's courses, hosted by Sunshine Support, strangely enough. But we organised it within weeks of getting that working diagnosis. And we all sat around the table together, TA, teacher, another TA, another teacher, head teacher, grandparents, parents. We all sat around in this workshop and we learned it for ourselves. And then we were like, interesting. She does that and she does that. Right, we could try this, we could try this. And it was really co-productive. It was a real co-productive, beautiful experience, very different to my other children's experiences. For instance, my eldest is diagnosed with autism, ADHD, and the PDA profile. That was not easy and not supportive and not validating and full of gaslighting and child protection and all sorts of stuff because we just weren't believed. So this to me was like, whoa, dream. But still it affected me. And one of the things you were talking about at the NAPLIC conference, and we've spoken about on the podcast as well, is that impact on us as parents when we get that diagnosis. Because even if it's a relief or we know it's coming, there is a period of, well, we're just not expecting it. There's almost grief and there's mourning, and then we feel sad and we feel guilty because we're like, whoa, what am I mourning for? What am I grieving for? Why am I saying that my child should be a certain way? And then you have to go through this sort of period of, oh, it's not that I feel that I'm mourning the loss of a child. It's that I feel sad that they're going to struggle. I feel sad that they're not going to have this plain sailing romantic life that I envisaged of having a mini me that's going to just sail through life with no problems. So there's so much to it. And I think that you really did incredibly well to encapsulate all of that. And what I also want to say is that we talked about this on the podcast. And by all means, guys, if you want to listen to the podcast, if you're listening and you want to listen to the podcast, just comment podcast we will send you the link, because we talk for a long time. There's loads of info on there. It's over an hour long, and it's just fascinating. But one of the things you did was you did a workshop with the parents, and then you visualized it. And we've got a link to that visual. It's a beautiful graphic. So if you want the research link to the graphic, please comment research. We've got our little elves, our sunshine elves, working in the background, and we can share these links with you. But I do recommend anybody who's interested in DLD, listen to that podcast. It's on Spotify, it's on YouTube, dead easy to get to. There's no paywalls or anything. Anyway, but I thought we could have a chat today about what that research is really, why it's important, and why it sort of brought about why we should be listening to that lived experience. So I thought at first we could talk a bit about the research, but actually let's go back a step and let's talk a little bit about DLD, because we're not clinicians and we're very passionate that we're not clinicians. This is the whole point. Clinicians are incredibly important. There is obviously a place for them and they're incredibly valuable. But, you know, Hannah, you're a researcher. Lauren, you're an educator with lived experience. I'm a parent. And then, you know, that's the whole point. It's these experiences that we really need to be listening to, because historically we've only ever listened to the point of view of the clinicians. So, Lauren, tell us about DLD. So, you know, we've understood what the different presentation is between your children, and I can absolutely relate to that. But what's been your experience of the presentation? You know, obviously there was those early, and I had this in my daughter, where the sounds are the same, but the words are not quite right. What else have you noticed about your son's presentation?
So for the early stages, there was, as I said, the babbling was in place. But for him, and this isn't universal, so one of the things about DLD is not every kid with DLD is the same and they don't all follow the same path. But for him, I tried to be the super good parent and bringing out the books, and he absolutely pushed books away. He had no interest. Looking back at it now, I think, oh, you were not interested in me sitting and talking because you were not accessing that language. And he might have had a little vague interest in a picture here or there, but it was short. It would be a few seconds and then he was up and off. So he was just a really physical little guy anyway. And then if I move forwards to when he's 2 turning 3, that's the point where I was anxious about it. I didn't want it to be a problem. I was going down the route of, if I ignore this, maybe it's just in my imagination, maybe I'm just an over anxious parent. So I didn't really go for help maybe as early as I could have. But I did then approach the health visitor, who said, oh, we could refer you. So maybe make a note of his language. What is he saying? What kind of things? And I thought, I don't need to do that. I don't need to go away and do that. I can list on the fingers of my hands how many words he's got. I don't need to write a list. I can tell you exactly which ones. It's bobble, it's daddy, it's this is a. So the vocabulary, the amount of stuff he was saying was tiny by the age of 2 and all the way up to 3. And then I noticed one day in the swimming pool, he turned to a lady and pointed to her and said, "Daddy." And up to the age of maybe even heading towards 4, I was daddy. He did not call me mum until he was quite old, because I then realized when the lady in the swimming pool was also daddy, that all adult humans are daddy. And I was like, oh, right, okay. So he would hang on to a word and he would massively overgeneralize it. That was one of his kind of ways of using language. So bobble was another one of his words, from bottle. And so it's quite common that young children mispronounce words. Sort of some sounds are harder than others. I knew that as a teacher, and I'm not worried about mispronunciation. It comes. So bobble was his word for wanting a drink, but then the overgeneralization, if it's raining, that's bobble. The water in the pool was bobble. The water in the bath was bobble. A river would be bobble. So the way he was taking in language and understanding how to use it was not standard then by that point. So then he was going into reception. We had then started seeing the speech therapist. She'd started to pencil in a diagnosis of DLD. It's slowly kind of starting to have the realization in our heads of what this means, going through the idea of, oh, it's not a delay. Oh, this is permanent. Oh, this is lifelong. And so we're having all of our kind of parent reaction to it. And for him, for his language now going into reception, he's got a slightly larger vocabulary, but that's when I started to notice that grammar was becoming a massive problem. It was not something that he was intuitively developing by listening to other people speak. So his grammar was what I would say very clunky. And that's when I used to start to describe it to family members as being as if you had a foreign exchange student living with you, a little tiny foreign exchange student, which isn't a great comparison because if you're learning a foreign language, you'll develop and you'll get there. But for him, it was the way he formed his sentences. I think he would have been great if he was born French because he did the words in the order that a French person might do, not English. I like the car red instead of the red car. And all of his tenses were, and still are, so he's 8 now, his tenses are wrong. So I go shop. To say something happened in the past, really hard. I goed. If he's on a good day. To know the word went, it's not happening. And then another one that's difficult for him is being able to remember a long so what am I trying to say? It's like, so a word with lots of syllables or a string of a lot of items. So cat, dog, we might be okay with those. There might be some mispronunciation still. Diplodocus, no, that's not happening. Or even the alphabet, it's because you've got to remember A, B, C, D, E. Oh, that's too many. It's gone. So that's still a struggle. A song. So he still can't do a whole nursery rhyme because there's too many parts to it. He loves singing and he'll join in with singing at school. Happily, there's like gestures that you can do with it, so that'll help him along, helps him to remember where they're up to in the song. But the actual lyrics of the song are too much for him to memorize. So last year he was overjoyed to learn part of Jingle Bells. I don't know what it's like in your house, but we just get the same 2 lines of Jingle Bells over and over at full volume because he loves the joy of singing out loud, but he'll just do the bit that he knows. So, and he doesn't feel bad about that. He's like happily yelling those 2 lines out over and over. So yeah, the actual beginning to talk, the amount of words he can remember and use confidently, the being able to say longer words or long strings of things, or being able to recite a whole nursery rhyme, being able to say the longer dinosaur names, which I just expect little kids to be obsessed with at that dinosaur phase. All of those things didn't happen, and they were all kind of a little bit surprising as they cropped up.
Oh gosh, yeah. And I think as well, because you're an educator, I think, let's go back to that sort of parental experience of you create a mini me and you're like, oh, I've got all these ideas. I'm an educator. This is going to be great. Their life is going to be immersed, they're going to be immersed in education and learning opportunities in a way that suits us and our family. And so then it's quite a wake-up call, isn't it? When that's just not going to happen in the way that you had originally set out for it to happen. And, you mentioned there about the expressive language and the receptive language. And in layman's terms, that, expressive language is language out. and receptive language is language in, and they both have to work together. And if you've got a child who's got difficulty, and Libby Hill, when I first went to one of her workshops, she drew this wall of bricks, and she said, this is all your areas of communication. Now let me pull a brick out from the bottom that you think is nothing. It could be expressive language. The whole wall just, can come crumbling down. And it's really important that we understand those little bits of expressive or receptive can have an enormous knock-on effect. And when then they're not working together, and it changes every day, like you said, on a good day, you might, his expectations, he might set them quite high if somebody's just met him for the first time. But then on the next day, it might be that he spent all his energy doing all of that on that day. And the following day, he's spent. There's nothing left, to give. And so they can be quite, their profile can be quite spiky, can't it? They one day is good, next day not so good. How do you find with sort of behavior, Lauren? Because I know with Ridley, when she was around 4 and up until that point, what we noticed was she would have quite enormous, what were being described to us as meltdowns. I would call it enormous overwhelm as a parent. But she genuinely could not cope. And for her, it was the word finding. So she wanted to say something, she couldn't find it, and then she couldn't actually say it. And she would sometimes say things that sounded like it, like, I've got 4 daughters, they love putting on shows for me, and she's a twin, and her twin is very, they're polar opposites. She's very sort of straight to the point, and like you can have a real decent conversation with her. Her twin is the opposite, and she dances around facts, and she wears a lot of things in her hair, and she's very girly and very over the top, and Ridley's just not. She's very straightforward. But her twin Remy, she would often just put on a show, and she'd be going, so welcome to my show, and this is what we're going to do. And Ridley would try and copy, but she couldn't form the speech, so she would end up saying things like, ladies and gentlemen, and because she couldn't quite formulate gentlemen. So we found that, she was trying so hard to copy her siblings, and it just wasn't coming, and she'd find it incredibly overwhelming. And then she would go into this sort of period of, we know it in the psychology field, of hypoarousal or hyperarousal, depending on how she was feeling. She would do a runner. She couldn't meet her own needs in that moment, and she would hide, and she looked defiant, and she looked avoidant. But actually, when we then start to pick apart why, we can see why she was terrified. She was really scared. Have you seen anything like that in your son?
Yeah. So maybe it comes down to the personality a bit. So Ridley sounds really outgoing, but like has been frustrated by the DLD as well.
Yeah.
For us, my youngest son is shy around other people, and desperate to be a good boy. So to be told off is absolutely mortifying for him. So he would go into school and just be as good as he possibly could be. So then tipping into masking, camouflaging. He was it probably by year 1, the year 1 teacher told me he would put his hand up because everybody was putting their hand up. And if the teacher said, oh, yeah, he would just be like, oh, what do you want? Absolutely no idea what, but everybody's putting their hands up. It's hands up time. What do you want me to say now? So he was just spending his day being as like his friends as he possibly could. So in the classroom, we didn't have issues sort of being brought back to us because he was just getting through. So then the playtimes were different. So his experience of playtimes would be more emotional, because then they're lovely kids in his school. I think we've been really lucky. We're one of those where things have gone well in the primary setting for us so far. lots of kids who want to play with him because he's one of the physical boys, and there was a big gang of them who just want to run in circles. So that's great. You don't need to say much when you're all just running in a circle together. And so he's into football, luckily, and basketball. So he's still got friends via that. But if things aren't going right, if somebody's doing something that he doesn't think they should in the playground, or if somebody's taken a turn and it wasn't their turn, then he hasn't got the language to be able to deal with that. And he has a very emotional response to it. So I think I would say his emotional development isn't probably at the level of his peers. And I feel like that is something I hear quite a lot of parents with children with DLD saying. And then the meltdowns do happen. For us, they are after school meltdowns. So he will hold it together. He will comply and be good and want to please. And he'll come out of the school smiling. And by the time we kind of get around the corner, then he's done. And it'll start to come out in strange ways. And he doesn't really know kind of what to do with all the feelings and emotions by that point. So he'll kind of be maybe really angry, shout at me, and it'll all just come. And he'll go some days to a childminder, and he gets on really well with the other kids there, and he's really well behaved. He has a great relationship with her. She's fantastic. And then he's so comfortable around her now that when I'm picking him up, he'll start to show a little bit of the, "Oh, mum," in front of her, and she goes, "Oh, I haven't seen that all day." And no, he saves it up for me, which I've seen research saying, "Oh, that means you're their safe space."
Absolutely.
It's lovely.
Absolutely. But I think, if they're masking, but they're also struggling with social rules, which we know that's, a difficulty as well, it can be really, well, yeah, it's almost like an impossible equation for them and their mental health and their nervous system, because of course at some point it's got to come out. It's like having it's that Coke bottle effect, isn't it? Where every little interaction is shaking the Coke bottle, and then they see you and the lid comes off. And yeah, totally get this. And yet, with Ridley, she doesn't mask at all. I have got two daughters who mask beautifully for other people, not so great for them. But Ridley has always been, I don't know whether it's because we had, I don't know, it could be just personality. It could be the fact that she had that very intense speech and language therapy from a very young age. But she's always, the minute she found that voice, she definitely uses it now. And it can be quite a relief, I must be honest. The fact that, I mean, I have had a phone call already from school since being on this Facebook Live. So the chances are that voice might have come out in school and she might have told someone where to go. Who knows? Who knows? So there's the downside of that as well. Now, Hannah, we heard on the podcast, we went into a lot of detail on the parental experiences, the family experiences. And yes, we've already said my experience is completely different to Lauren's, but we love how it's all okay. It's all accepted. And I'm learning, I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Completely different presentation in my daughter, but at the same time, it totally makes sense. And it's lovely how families do come together. It's one of those communities actually where it's like anything goes. It's really full of acceptance. But can you give us an overview of why this research was so important?
Yeah, I mean, just hearing from yours and Lauren's experiences, it's obviously a really life-changing thing to have that diagnosis, because you can access support and you can access this, as you said, this wonderful community when you find it, of DLD families. And I think we were saying earlier what an inclusive community it is, and there's so much kind of support out there. I think the importance of doing this research came to me throughout the study. Obviously, I knew it was important at the beginning, which is why I kind of campaigned for my university to pay for us to do this, and I was very keen that it would happen. Just my inkling being from speaking to people about what getting a diagnosis is like, and I've had my own diagnosis as well. When I was 15, which is very late, I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And so when I was thinking back to my experience of getting that diagnosis and kind of that being so life-changing, I understood myself. I was able to use the term disabled and connect with the disabled community, and I was able to start being an activist and understanding what my future might look like as well. And then so I was thinking back to the research that I'd done in my PhD of these families not getting the proper formal diagnosis that would maybe allow them to have that experience. And I thought that I'm sure that's not right. I'm sure it's not right that families are so concerned about the stigma or are so going to be emotionally hurt by the term disorder and think that's a negative thing that they wouldn't want the diagnosis. So that's when I kind of spoke to my steering group, so Lauren and Anna and Jenna and Kate, and I sort of said, is this right? Is my inkling right here? And they said, absolutely, absolutely, you need to speak to families, we need to do this research. So that's when we put the questions together for the interviews, and I spoke to 15 different families who told me how difficult that period was before they got the diagnosis, how emotional it was to have on the day. They all taught me through on the day, what was that like? And I said, put me in your shoes, what happened? What can you remember? Paint the picture for me. So we got these beautiful descriptions of exactly what happened. And then the aftermath of, this kind of, maybe being quite isolated and feeling misunderstood, and the challenges of their child having this hidden disability that the world can't see. But they're kind of maybe masking and they're having these challenges at home that are going on. And I think all of them said that getting that diagnosis, yes, it was really hard, but actually that kind of was a real turning point for them. It meant that they could access intervention. It meant that they could apply for an EHCP. It meant that they could, Google it, which, we always say, oh, don't Google something, it's the worst thing you can do. Actually, I think for a lot of people, it's one of the most empowering things that you can do, because you get this knowledge, you read other people's stories. And that was another part of the research, actually, was people sharing their stories so that other people could know that they weren't alone in going through that, and any kind of guilt that they might have had about feelings that they'd had. One person, more than one actually, kind of compared it to a bereavement, and those kind of emotions that come with, the shock, the denial, the upset that happens, or wondering about the future, and just things shifting in such a massive way, and then also feeling guilty for feeling like that. But actually, thousands of families across the UK, when they get the diagnosis, they have this shared experience. And I think that was what was so incredible about the workshop, is that we all looked together at each other's experience. And I think people were quite moved by that, and were able to say, oh yeah, you went through that, me too. So yeah, I think it kind of came through. I don't know what you think, Lauren, but as we did the project, it kept, every time I spoke to someone new, I kind of went, oh yeah, this is really important.
And also for the people who had some of the worst experiences, I think it was really nice to have a group acknowledge that, no, that should not have been said to you, that should not have happened. Just having that support from the wider community, I think probably helped them kind of process that a bit and yeah, maybe move on for it, because some of the experiences were really not very pleasant.
We talked a bit about those on the podcast. So again, do watch that podcast, listen to it. Because I think that what you're describing there is the validation, isn't it? Because if you've had a bad experience, or you're told it's your fault, actually, it's your fault that your child's presenting like this, it can be re-traumatizing every time you think about that, because that's quite traumatizing to be told that. And I remember actually Libby Hill explaining DLD to me, and I said, oh my God, it's the first thing you think of as a parent. Was it me? Did I do something wrong? And she said, no, that's the whole point. There's nothing you could have done to improve this situation to this point. You didn't cause it, and you've done nothing to make it worse. In fact, that's the whole point of the diagnosis. It's not a delay, but it's also not caused by anything. It's a neurodevelopmental condition. It's a neurodivergence. We weren't calling it a neurodivergence back then, but we are now. And I love that, because it gives that extra layer of validation. And I think it's so, so important. And we see it in the work we do here, that there is that power in numbers, the power of validation when you're amongst your own. And we often say, whilst we're all in the same storm and we're all in different boats, and we can recognize one another's boats and go, yep, it's looking hairy over there. High five to you because you're nailing it. And that's all sometimes we can do, but that actually makes a massive difference to us as parents, just being told you're doing your best. And that's incredible,
One of the
No, go for it.
One of the big things for me for getting the diagnosis and the going back to what Hannah was saying about how the parents in the research group were saying, no, it's so important to have the diagnosis, so don't keep that from parents, is that I did not want my child to be labeled as naughty, disruptive, not trying their best. And we knew there was something going on. And so we were fortunate to get that diagnosis, the same as you, sort of penciled in from 4, formalized at age 5. So we could go to the teachers and go, this is what it is. This is what it's going to look like. This is what he's going to need. If he's not listening, it's because he doesn't know what's going on. And I think it was easier to see the expressive language at the start, because that was easy to notice. And the flip side of it is the receptive language. He cannot follow. So I mentioned how he can't say a series of things because it's too much. He also can't hold in his mind and follow a series of things. So if you give him 3 instructions, it's not going to happen. He might remember one of them. So going through school, it suddenly flips. Like maybe at home, it's all about expressive. You want to chat with your little kid. At school, it flips to, oh, so much coming at you. All the language is coming at you all day, every day. And it's not just the school teachers as well. So we've been fortunate that the teachers have been really interested and supportive and wanted to learn more. But throughout your day, you're also meeting dinner supervisors. Some schools have a sports coach coming in who's external. Visitors come in, we'll go off to sports clubs. So I'm the parent there going, excuse me, can I just say, if you tell my child to do all these things, he's going to just stare at you. And if you say, have you understood? He'll go, because he's a good boy and he hasn't got a clue what you've just said, but this is what you want me to do, don't you? So I'm doing this. So yeah, it kind of flips into that, trying to deal with all of that reception language that's coming at you from everywhere.
Yeah.
So having the diagnosis and being able to try your best to get people to understand. Yeah. It's a shortcut to a very lengthy explanation that I would give otherwise.
No, completely agree. And I think as well, as they move into you know, Ridley's just gone up to senior school. As they get to that age, and you've got to give them that bit more freedom, and she's gone to a mainstream school and she's doing incredibly well. And I always, when I'm saying she's doing incredibly well, I'm looking at the social element, I'm looking at the sensory element. I never look at exam grades or anything like that, because I just want them to be content. It's all about mental health for me, shock horror. But you know, I see now that she's entering this new stage of enormous vulnerability because of these things, because I can't follow her around, because there's no, obviously there's lots of teachers, and we're very lucky. Our school have immersed themselves in DLD and ADHD this year, which is great. So that's top of their priority list in terms of training. But then you're seeing the kids, and you know, kids will be kids. And so they'll say, like, what are you doing it like that for? Why could you not say that? Why didn't you just do that? Oh, did you not just follow what the teacher said? And there was one bad experience that my daughter had, and she just couldn't keep up. And she said, Mum, the teacher just kept saying, right, write this down. She said, I just couldn't. I'm used to having the laptop at that point, because laptops are pretty good for our children with DLD. And she said, and it hadn't been organised. It was like the first week. And the teacher said, why are you not doing the work? And she said, I couldn't say anything. So she went completely mute. And she said, I'll come back to you at the end. And so at the end, she said to her, what was your problem? And I thought, oh God, what an awful thing to say. And so Ridley said, I've got DLD. And she said, what's that got to do with you writing stuff down though? And she said, so I said to her, it's about language in and language out. And I really do think you need to speak to the Senko about this and learn more about DLD. She said, and I felt awful, but I said, but you did so well. You did so well. But I think, you know, it is this sort of anomaly, because quite often this is not intelligence levels. Our kids can absorb a lot of information. And if you get them in the right way of communicating, and like you said, in that safe space, and it could be communicating through drawing, it could be through creative expressive, you know, means, it could be drama, it could be whatever. And you know, listening to DLD youngsters, they do talk a lot about creatives and art, don't they, rather than words. I know Ridley always said she thinks in pictures rather than words. But when you get, I know particularly with Ridley, at that point, she can, oh my goodness, she's so clever. She absorbs so much information, but that information's got to go in a way that fits. You know, there's no point in sort of hammering stuff in that, you know, hoping that something will land. It's got to be in a way that works. I'm going to come to the comments now, because there are tons of comments, so we're not going to be able to get through all of them. But let me have a quick look. Sarah says, my son is out of school at the moment and I need EOTist. Does he need to have an EHCP? Yes. So that's probably targeted at me. Targeted, that sounded awful. That's probably a question for me. So EOTIS, for those watching, is education other than in school. And it's a really fabulous way, actually, of getting a very bespoke package of education, health and care for your child. And if your child has had an experience whereby school really hasn't worked out for them, because maybe that, you know, you're not as lucky as Laura and I in terms of the teachers that you've had, it can cause quite a lot of barriers between the child and that school building. So having an education other than in school, it can really work very well. The formal term EOTIS, or it used to be called EOTAS, you do need an EHCP for that, because it's all funded. Elective home ed is not something you have an EHCP for, because that's not funded through an EHCP. So there's two different ways there. People get them mistaken for one another. Gemma says, hello, I got my son diagnosed with severe DLD. I find it so hard, especially with school. And I think a lot of, I mean, I don't know whether you found this in the research, but a lot of the difficulties is often with people not understanding. So that it's really hard, because you're not just talking about your child, you're actually then having to educate them in this whole new thing. Did you find that?
Yeah, we did. We spoke to loads of people who, you know, were trying to work out, you know, they had to become experts in DLD because they had to digest all this information about it and work out, so how am I going to make that so that my child's teacher understands, so that their grandparents understand, so that their friends and siblings understand, which actually, Lauren, I think you should talk about the work that you've done in helping siblings to understand.
Yes, great segue.
Basic segue. Yeah, well, in the kind of that parent vibe of post-diagnosis, going hunting for all information possible and joining every group I could find, I was also looking for information to try and help my son to understand, and then to share it with the wider family, because not families are so diverse. Not everybody thinks the same way. So some people are more open to chatting about additional needs, and some people are more of the opinion of, oh, don't worry about it, everything's fine. So I've got cheesy
Plug away, plug away.
I made a picture book for talking about the diagnosis with my son, because I wanted something physical that we could sit and look through together, that was a non-fiction, essentially, sort of saying, oh, this is what it means and this is what you can do. So something that we could go back to a lot of times, because he's not going to pick something up first time through necessarily, and it's quite a complicated, unusual thing to talk about. And so then I have just made one for siblings. This is my draft copy. I made my brother and my sister has DLD, because siblings are amazing, but DLD is such a little known thing that I tried to kind of piece it together into, this is what it means, this is what you could do to help if you are feeling like it, no pressure, because you need your own space too, you're not your sibling's keeper. And then also, so following on from that, the end of it talks about ways that the sibling can kind of look after their own needs, and we appreciate everything they do, and they are a part of a team. So yeah, I've got a really nice photo of my son showing the book Meet DLD to his granny and talking her through it, what it means, and so she could understand it. So that was, yeah, ideal.
I love that. We'll put the links to those in the comments. So if anybody wants the book, because they are incredible. I'm about to get the second one, because that's brand new, isn't it?
It is this year.
The first one, I have sat down with Ridley, and I was just explaining before we came on, this week Ridley's got this really skinny bookshelf next to her bed that she likes to put like this week's books on, and that the first one is on there, and then she's got all her DLD books, because it's DLD Awareness Week, so she is like well up for sharing information this week.
And it's so nice how much more information is coming through, and so many more resources and animations for kids with DLD. There's lots more available.
So much, so much. Sarah says, my son sounded German as a youngster. That sounds familiar, yeah. Louise says, who do you speak to get a diagnosis? I'm resonating with a lot of these points for my daughter. So Louise, I would urge you to come to our DLD webinar so that you can learn a little bit more about what, because I think one of the things that we will collectively say is quite often we can describe things to GPs, clinicians, teachers, but without using the right language, our voice gets lost in everything. It's almost like we get sort of they don't take us seriously. But if we can say, oh, you know, we have issues, we've got concerns with this, and we're specifying the things, it's almost like trigger words. It'll get you onto the next stage a bit quicker. So come along to that webinar next month with Libby Hill. But it's a speech and language therapist, essentially. Now, I know that I was offered to go onto a waiting list for a speech and language therapist originally, but the waiting list was going to be really, really long, because there were children deemed to be more severe with different, you know, needs. So I decided to just go straight to Libby Hill, who I adore and all of our clients adore. And so I got her seen within weeks, and her diagnosis, well, you know, the working diagnosis came very, very soon, well, the same day. So somebody else has said we got ours during an assessment for an EHCP. Yeah, so again, because you have speech and language therapy assessments as part of the EHC needs assessment request. Gemma says he's now come out of mainstream. So I think, oh, okay, so her son is out of mainstream. He's in a speech and language resource centre, but that's totally not going how we thought it would. He started in September, and now we're on an hour a morning because he's just not coping. And this is tricky, because we want our children to engage in education, of course, because they need to, they deserve to. You know, every child has a right to an education. It's really hard when it's just not working out. And of course, we're sold this sort of like specialist provision thing, particularly with a speech and language resource. But sometimes even they are not well versed in DLD, because they're looking at autism, which is not a speech and language condition. It's a neurodivergence, which will have certain elements that we need to work on with speech and language, OT or whatever. So that must be really, really frustrating. Gemma, do get in touch if you want any help with that, because we can absolutely help you. Joe actually runs our offer down in Wales. So she's one of our she supports parents in Wales, Sunshine in Wales. And Joe says, from listening today, my daughter has DLD, but back 20 years ago was diagnosed as expressive and receptive language disorder. There was no support for the families, and she was subsequently put into a speech and language unit for weekly SALT therapy. Today's live has been very informative and made me really reflective. Well, I'm really pleased, because what Joe doesn't know about SEND, well, it's called ALN in Wales, is not worth knowing. So that's brilliant. And Gabby is one of our very, very experienced educators here. Gabby is a specialist in DLD. So she ran a language provision up in Sunderland. And she said that this is the kind of conversation they were having with parents. I'm guessing the conversation around, understanding diagnosis, being validated. So it's something she's really, really passionate about. I love the fact that I can work with Gabby every day. Tasha says, I sat in an appointment with a paediatrician who said she thought I was looking for something that wasn't there. I've heard this actually. It just triggered a memory of mine where I took Ridley for something else to the paediatrician, and I said, oh, she's got developmental language disorder. And he said, how did you get that diagnosed? And I said, well, she had this independent. And he goes, oh, the independent lot. Yeah, they'll find anything if you ask them to. Like, good job, I'm a bit resilient. So Tasha goes on to say, she then turned to my husband and said, do you think your wife is the problem?
What?
She did apologise in an appointment a couple of years later, but that meant for 2 years it was on my daughter's profile that I was the problem. And I don't think that people realise how damaging that is.
Yeah.
Because, of course, it's every time you go to the doctor, it's there on file. That is absolutely awful. You should never have gone through that. Well, I could go on and on, because there is, so many comments, but we've come to the end of our slot, and we could talk for hours about this. I mean,
we
did
could.
for a long time on the podcast as well. Please do have a look. If today is just not enough for you, just go straight to our YouTube channel or Spotify and have a listen. But I think I've covered everything. So guys, if to round everything up, first and foremost, look at Lauren's books on Amazon, please. You can either type a name in, Lauren Crisp, or ask us for the links. We'll send them to you. If you want the links to the research page, which has the beautiful visual, we can send you that. Just type in research and we'll give you the links for that. If you want links to our podcast, to our YouTube or Spotify channel, comment and we'll give it to you. We've got the DLD workshop coming up, which I'm really excited about, because I learn something new every time I watch that. And I think I've covered everything. Again, if you need any help, anyone watching, just give us a shout. That's what we're here for. Don't ever suffer in silence. If any of this resonates and you're thinking, what on earth do I do next? Just send us a message through Facebook, through our website, through Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever. We're all over the place. We're everywhere. We just love a chat. So just ping us a message. Ladies, it's been an absolute joy. Thank you so, so much for joining me this morning. I think that we validated a lot of people. And I know that, we try to fool ourselves into thinking not many would watch, but there was lots watching. Less pressure at the end, isn't there, if I say that? But for everybody watching, remember DLD Awareness Day is on Friday. There we go. Check out Waddled on Facebook and Instagram. And hashtag everything you share with DLD Day, because actually then you can click on that hashtag, I don't know what's happening with my speech this morning, and all of the thread for DLD Day will come up. So it's a nice, easy hashtag to follow. But it's been a joy. We really need to be doing more. I just absolutely love it. Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much. I think I've got loads more things I could say about DLD, but I'm thinking of all the other things my son does, like processing time. Oh, so much.
Oh, we'll do another one. Why not? Thank you both so much. And I'll see you, I'm sure, soon. I'll be in touch.
Oh, thank you for having us.
No